Hello, welcome to Policy Conversations with Dr. P, a series of personal conversations with Northampton students about our district's anti-discrimination policies. My name is Dr. Provost, and I'll be your guide and your partner in helping you understand our policies. Today, I'm joined by Colin and Mavis, and we're here to talk about Policy AC, which is non-discrimination. I know you've had an opportunity to look it over, and we've had an opportunity to chat about it a little bit. I would open it up to you to ask any questions you have about the policy and how it applies to our community.
A question I have about the policies is like who and like what would it apply to, like student-based, like who would it apply to?
Our policy is very specific on covering all members of the community. So that's our students, visitors to the schools, caregivers, and our faculty. And so this policy ensures that anyone who is really a part of the Northampton Public Schools is protected from discrimination under the policy.
Who decides what the policy is and how it's followed?
This policy and all the policies that the district has are created by the Northampton School Committee. There is a subcommittee of 3 members of the full committee who work on policy. We meet, well, in normal times I would say that we probably met on a monthly basis, but since COVID we haven't been meeting as frequently because there have been many things for us to deal with, for me to deal with in particular. But the subcommittee works on policies and then recommends them to the full committee, and the full committee votes on policies. I should say that the committee is also supported by an organization known as the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, which creates model policy language and recommends to school committees to adopt. So this policy that we have is very similar to anti-discrimination policies in many other districts because as its origin, it had the model policy recommended by the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. Now, there is a lot of modification that goes on. In the subcommittee, a lot of policies are modified, specifically at the beginning. One of the things that our committee likes to do is add sort of introductory language that explains the purpose of the policy before getting into it. And then the policy can also be modified at the school committee meeting as well. So we have a process of having 2 readings before a policy takes effect. So the first time a policy goes to the school committee, it's just introduced and read so that members can think about it. And then at the next meeting, we have a vote on the policy.
Is it diverse? Is there people of color who are also work on these policies?
I don't believe that any of the members of our current school committee identify as people of color.
I know the policy goes with people that get discriminated as, and I feel like people would get confused as thinking discrimination. The first thing that would pop in mind is people of color, but what are your thoughts you think as discrimination would be and with this policy?
So the policy is very clear on who's protected. These are individuals that belong to in sort of the policy language as what are known as protected classes. And there's an extensive list. So I'm actually going to read from the policy so that everyone is clear on who's covered by the anti-discrimination policy. So the key sentence here is no student is denied access to any educational program or other activity of the Northampton Public Schools for reason of age, color, disability, economic status, ethnic background, gender identification, marital status, national origin, pregnancy, pregnancy-related conditions, race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation. So individuals with those identities, any of those identities or multiple identities are covered and protected from discrimination by this policy.
And what about things that are said to kids in the hallways, or if there's discrimination that's maybe not seen as discrimination as much, but I don't know, the use of the N-word or other things, how is that brought to faculty's attention?
Well, another part of this policy says that the individuals will refrain from using language that casts aspersion on others, right? So the use of the N-word, use of any kind of racial or ethnic slur is language that casts aspersion. So that would be a potential violation of the policy. And what I would say is the process is two-tiered, because the individuals who could be engaged in the behavior could be students or visitors, or they could be faculty members. And it's a different, or any staff member, it's a different process when you're dealing with a student or a visitor than when you're dealing with a member who is an employee of the district. So for students, the process is really around education.
Okay.
You know, education starting at an early age. The goal is always to try to be as supportive as possible to both the victim and the perpetrator. When you're talking about employees, that's a goal as well, but there are also certain obligations that the employer has to maintain a level of behavior and a level of conduct on behalf of the employees. That means that sometimes it's educational as well, but also comes in with a component that's more disciplinary. And I think a lot of that has to do with the maturity of the individuals involved.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with middle school students or even high school students, your expectations are somewhat different than when you're dealing with adults.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they would like some of the students here, and their idea in their head is like, if I have if I have a little black sister, or I have black friends, and not myself, or because some of them they would say that they're not from that color, right? And then they would go and say like the racial slurs that wouldn't really go imply to them just because they're related like that. But now that you cleared that policy up, it would make more sense.
I'm glad. I mean, it's clear that this policy is written from the perspective of the victim, right? So you could hold one of these protected identities, and you could still be someone who was violating other people's rights by using that type of language.
And if it's used from a victim's perspective, does that mean that you guys would add more to policy? Like if you never seen it before, like a problem, for example, with the victim, something happened with the victim, and then next thing you know, it's not for including in the policy, or you would refine some stuff from the policy to make it more strict, I would say, or unquote.
So we have a policy review process. This is one policy, and this section AC that I was talking about before we started taping goes through all the different anti-discrimination policies in the district, and we're constantly in the process of updating those. Now, we don't typically make an adjustment to a policy based on something that happened in a school or an incident. There have been situations where that's happened. Probably the most famous one was the policy that the school committee adopted banning the Confederate flag after an incident that happened at the middle school where students were displaying the Confederate flag and creating an atmosphere that wasn't conducive to the learning of all students, an atmosphere that created fear for students. But most of the time, our policies are changed based on changes in the law. So if you recall, when you were looking at the second page of the policy, which we're going to put in a link to this video, there are a number of references. They're referencing state law, they're referencing federal law, and they're also referencing regulations. So most of the time what happens is a state or federal law or regulation is changed, and then our policy is modified to come into compliance with that.
So the policies are they're chained up with the laws that we have, and then if that changes, then policies do change.
Correct.
I guess this is less policy related, but what about education and how it's taught? I feel like how we talk about Black history and just subjects in general, is there policies around what needs to be taught, or what is taught, and who, if the classes are required, is that, I don't know if that's based around this, but.
Sure. We do have policies that describe the number of credits needed for graduation. We do have policies that address certain topics, not by name, but Well, actually, probably the main policy we have that addresses a area of curriculum specifically by name is sex ed, and there's a policy around that, and certain notifications that have to go out around that. But in general, there are very few policies that have to do with the content of instruction, because that is seen as the domain of educators, both teachers and administrators. And so where you'll find the material that talks about how we want to address that is more in school improvement plans and district improvement plans. Now, the district improvement plan is made by a group of teachers, administrators, parents, community members, and that is updated every 3 to 5 years. Each school has a school improvement plan that's updated every 1 or 2 years, and that's created by the school council. And it's in the district improvement plan as well as the school improvement plans that you'll see more detailed information about things like culturally relevant instruction, culturally sustaining instruction, anti-racism education. That's where you'll find that kind of content.
Oh, okay. Do students like know the policy? Like, is this like put out? Like, do like us, like high school students, like get this or like read over this or like required to like know it?
So that was a question I was going to ask you. My feeling is that these policies are not well known by students or by our community. I think even some of our employees may not be aware of all of these policies, which is why I'm engaging in this public education campaign and why I thank you for partnering with me to help get it started. I'm about to send out a communication to the entire community that describes not only this policy, but also all of the district's anti-discrimination policies. I was at the middle school a couple of weeks ago discussing this idea with some students there, and they said a letter or a memo is great, but what would really be impactful for students is a video, which I thought was a great idea. But I also think that a single video that takes on all of the anti-discrimination policies is probably going to be too long for anyone to watch.
Yeah.
So my hope is that between the combination of that communication and these videos, we can raise the level of awareness about our policies among all members of our school community.
Yeah, because I feel like some students are like, they're going through like discrimination and stuff, and they just don't like know about the policies, and like I feel like it's not put out as much, because if it were, like I feel like I would see less students going through what they're going through. And I feel like if it's put out and everybody knows about it, I feel like the community can be stronger and better.
And what I would say to anyone watching this is, if you feel like you're being discriminated against, remember there's a district policy for that. And you know, that's words on a paper, and that's one thing, but the question is, so how do you access your rights under the policy? And my answer to that is go to a trusted adult, right? The policies are put in place by the school committee, and so they're like the rules of the road for the entire district. And so you have teachers, ESPs, others, they're responsible for implementing the policies. The administrators in the building are responsible for implementing the policies, and I ultimately am responsible for making sure the policy is followed throughout the district. So one of the things I'll be talking about in that communication is, so how do you make a complaint if you feel like one of the policies isn't being followed? And there are, some of the policies have specific rules about who you need to go to, but I feel that if you start with a trusted adult and say, this is what's happening to me, or this is what I observe happening to one of my peers that I think is a violation of policy, they can help you get started. You know, they may end up referring you to a building administrator, or it may end up referring you to me ultimately. But I think if you feel that there's a potential violation of policy, let us know, because we really feel that these policies are important. We feel that they're put in place in order to create the kind of culture and climate where students can learn and where employees can work and not feel like they're under attack. And so the policies are there to support people. And so please let us know if you're feeling not supported.
I definitely feel like an awareness of this should be put out more often. like stuff, because I think, in my opinion, stuff like this shouldn't be like unaware because there's people that, like I said earlier, there's people that go through stuff and they don't even know about the policy. I feel like once it gets once it gets like put out there, I feel like more students would feel like more trusted to the community, and I think their options would be open to more and to be more safe.
So I would ask you if you have any other ideas to help get the word out. So like I said, we're doing it in writing, we're doing it by video, obviously. What else do you think would be helpful in helping students and staff to understand their rights?
I feel like we could do like a meeting in like entire school in the auditorium, or like per grade, or however the order would go, and just talk about the policies, and just to be like, hey, we have these options here for you guys, and like if you feel like you're alone, you're not, because you have these policies here that can help you, and you can just make them feel more protected. Like just like be like, here's a shield for you, and they can just protect themselves with the policy.
Thank you for that suggestion. I will definitely follow up with my team on that. I want to thank you for joining me in this experiment. I hope it's going to be helpful for our district, and I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you, sir.
Thank you.
Good to meet you.